All right. I guess we are live. So welcome, everybody. My name is Sven Efftinge. I'm a co-founder of Gitpod, and I have the pleasure to talk to you and tell you about what we are doing with Gitpod and what ephemeral developer environments are and why you should all take a closer look at defining them in code. So let's start with a problem. We are all, basically doing software engineering like we ever did, where we would go to some project, it's some sort of repository, and we need to figure out how do I contribute on this project. And what we usually do is we go to some README or so. I'm not only talking about open source projects, but also professional projects. And there are all kinds of little things we need to do in order to start coding, right? We need to do the git checkout, we need to install the tools and requirements we need. So those include maybe databases, application servers, caches, orchestration tools, compilers, runtimes, and all these things. We want to have an IDE or some editor, some decent environment. So when I'm talking about developer environments here, I'm not talking about a sophisticated editor like an IDE, but really everything, the whole user land, everything we need in order to be productive. We need to have a configuration, everything needs to be properly set up. And of course, once we have the source code and all the tools available, we run the build, we download the internet, and then also build the code, we run compilers and so on. And then eventually we might be lucky and we are able to be, do coding or be of value, creative. I've been working as a consultant before I started my own businesses. And so I have seen places where it took me 1 or even close to 2 weeks until I could actually really code in an environment, because it was, just the documentation was outdated and everything was so complicated. And I had, it was not only my time that was wasted, but really also the time of the people in the project, because I had constantly need to reach out to them and ask them, right? So this is, I think, something that many of you can probably relate to, that we are wasting a lot of time for waiting for tests, waiting for builds, and massaging our dev environments. And I think a lot of us have just taken that as a given. So we make fun of that. But not really, like we are trying to do small improvements, automating a little here, a little there, but there is no kind of comprehensive solution to this. So what we worked on with Gitpod, what we thought is, what if we were kind of just putting everything into a box and basically apply infrastructure as code to dev environments? So we describe a dev environment in code, we have a formal recipe, and then we go even ahead one step and make it so that we continuously apply this automation. So we integrate that just like into our dev pipeline. So whenever there is a change to the dev environment description, like even code changes or dependency changes and so on, we are rebuilding the whole dev environment on every commit, basically. And so with that, if you look at your repository, you would be able, in theory, to start coding from every commit, because everything is automated, it's there already, and you can just start coding, right? So you can think of this idea as CI/CD applied to developer environments. And before I go more into concepts and so on, I would love to give you a short demo for that, so that just get a better idea of what this feels. So the general concept of ephemeral developer environments is, can be implemented by many different projects. So there are some alternatives to Gitpod. that are not open source, but for instance, very popular one is GitHub Codespaces. They also slowly get into this ephemerality where they would also continuously pre-build your environments. I want to show you the open source project Gitpod today. So there is a Gitpod.io, which is the SaaS version that we are running that you can just use. There is a generous freemium tier that you can use in order to work on your open source stuff, your hobby project, and so on. You can also install Gitpod on your own machines and clusters. The idea here is that you have a repository, maybe on GitLab or on GitHub, it doesn't really matter. We also support Bitbucket. And you are working on this, and there are kind of different situations where you would want to start coding, right? Or you at least want to have a dev environment. So here, for instance, there is a pull request. I'd like to review that. And so what I can do is, well, I could look into all the changes here, but I see, okay, that's lots of stuff. I don't really know what's going on there. I want to have a more convenient coding environment. And also I want to be able to actually run some of the tests or write another test or, just verify indeed. So I click this Gitpod button here and start a dev environment. So I click it here. It starts over here. And just to explain you what it really does is the button really only puts gitpod.io hash in front of the URL. And so what happens here is that we are sending this context URL, we call this a context URL, to Gitpod. And Gitpod is then analyzing that and is looking into that branch here. So it understands, oh, this is GitHub, this is pull request, oh, this is a branch. And when looking at that branch, it checks whether there is a configuration that describes what the dev environment should look like. And in fact, there is one, right? This is a Gitpod YAML, and it is looking at that. So it started this dev environment here for me based on that description. And I can just show you what the description looks like here. It's very simple because we are looking at the Spring Pet Clinic example, and there is not a lot of special things we need to do. We don't even have a special container description here. You could usually specify a Docker file that you want to have for your dev environments where you would install databases and compiler versions and so on. If you don't do that, you get a default image, and that default image obviously runs Java. So we don't need to do anything in addition. You can specify what processes should run during the preparation phase that I'm going to cover later, like this, we call that pre-build. And then also what should run when I start a workspace. And what you see here, this is a terminal, that process here, right? I just started it with Java jar. And then you also see the build logs here of like the Maven install. And you see that those were taken 3 minutes, but we didn't wait 3 minutes, right? So that's the effect of the pre-build. So this ran actually when this last person committed on this pull request, like when Victor committed this pull request, and this ran immediately. And every reviewer, or also when Victor wants to come back and do some changes based on feedback, they get this workspace that was built here and can work on that on top of that. So what you see here in the browser is VS Code. I didn't cover that. So that's Visual Studio Code running in the browser with all the extensions that it provides. So you can tell, like, there is just proper Java support. I don't know what I could show you here. It has, of course, content assist. There are, I don't know, this warnings and so on. And I can also debug the applications, debug tests. Under the hood, it runs the Java development tools in a headless mode. Like that is kind of the Java language servers using the Java development tools from Eclipse. So you have basically all the features that Eclipse allows you to do. There's, you know, all these source actions, organized imports, generating headers, and you also have all the refactoring functions. It is context dependent. So if I refactor here, I have inline method and move. So those are all the features you get. You can use the VS Code in the browser thing. You can also use other IDEs. Gitpod currently supports VS Code Desktop, and the JetBrains IDE, specifically IntelliJ IDEA comes to mind for Java. And you can also use SSH. So I can show you these points as well. For instance, SSH, if I, you know, this is the dashboard of Gitpod where I can see what projects I have, what workspaces are running, and here's the workspace that is currently running. And I can just connect to SSH and then copy the link I just got. And now I'm in that same workspace. So I can also prove that by connecting to, there's a command line tool in Gitpod workspaces that is called GP, and that has a command called tasks. And I think it is attach. I can attach to the tasks that are currently running. And so this is the one that is currently running. And now you can see I can even cancel it here. And now I'm really looking at the same container. So the two shells are completely the same, connected to each other. But I guess you also would like to see the IntelliJ integration. By the way, if you have questions, I'm not sure what the platform, but the comments will be forwarded to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. So also in between, but also at the end of the session. So here in my user settings, I can choose what kind of IDE I want to use. I can also do other things, kind of what size of a workspace I want to have, or whether I like to have light or dark theme. So, and I have also the possibility to configure my personal .files repository that would be injected into every workspace and also initialized there. So for my personal settings. So let me switch this to IntelliJ and start a workspace on this project. This is actually also Spring Pet Clinic, but this time it is my own clone that I have on GitLab. So I can start one from here, but also show you how to start it from GitLab. There is a Gitpod button on GitLab as well. The difference here is that this Gitpod button is actually a GitLab feature. So it's in every GitLab installation, you have this Gitpod button. In order to get a Gitpod button in GitHub, you will have to install a special browser extension that is on the marketplace for Chrome and Firefox. So lots of information. I'm just throwing it out at you. If you have questions, just ask. So I'm starting a workspace on this one. You see again, same pattern. There is this hash and then the branch I'm looking at. And now Gitpod is analyzing this and is preparing a workspace based on that. So it saw there is also in this repository a Gitpod YAML, of course, and now it starts this workspace based on whatever was defined there, and also checks whether there is a pre-build or not, or a special container image. And since I have changed the settings to use IntelliJ, it will now start not in VS Code, but instead it will open in JetBrains. So it prompts me with this, and I have to move it to another window. And so now I'm seeing this screen where IntelliJ IDR connects to that remote workspace through their new gateway mechanism. Sorry, I think I need to do it again. I accidentally closed it on the other screen. Sorry about that. All right. So there it is. This is just the, this is IntelliJ as you know it, but the heavy work is done remotely in my Gitpod workspace. So heavy work means all the language smartness, analyzing ASTs and so on, the indexing, that's all happening there. And then the new JetBrains remote support allows to talk to a thinner client, that is what we see here, through a certain protocol. And here we have the same thing that I again can also connect to SSH, or even also in addition, open this in VS Code if I want to. And yeah, so this is I'm not a IntelliJ IDEA user actually. When I did Java, I was an Eclipse user, but I've done some plugin programming for IntelliJ, and for that I had to use it a bit. So I know it has some really cool features in terms of Java, understanding the programming languages and doing the right thing at some point. And so we looked at this, and it has really kind of the same features that you would have locally. And that's the whole idea. So the point is, you don't have a local copy of all your workspaces, but for every task, you can now start a dev environment and just use it. And you see here, like, imagine this was the same project. Someone asked me for a code review on that project. I'm doing that on this side, but I still have my ongoing work in that other workspace. They don't, they don't conflict with each other. I don't need to do kind of git branch changes and rebuilding and so on. And when I'm done with this code review, by the way, I didn't show you the cool view here. I can just, if I'm not happy with something, he removed serializable. That makes sense, actually. So I like it. So let's say yes. That's great. So I can just comment on that here. And then you can see this comment pops up here, right? So this is a really nice integration that VS Code has for doing code reviews. And when I'm done, I can submit my code review and just close the browser. And then Gitpod will automatically clean up, like it will stop that workspace. And then also will, after 2 weeks, I haven't touched that workspace, it will automatically be garbage collected for me. So if you had a closer look when I showed you my workspaces list, this is only today. Like all the workspaces I've been working on today, because I'm spinning up new workspaces for all my tasks. I do code reviews, or I do an incremental change on a PR I'm working on, and so on. And I just do that, and then I don't have to go back. I sometimes might leave some changes in. I can inspect what that is, but I don't really miss anything here. And so then I have this inactive workspaces, and they get deleted eventually. All right, I mean, that was kind of a really fast run through what Gitpod can do. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are many more things you can figure out. It is free to use on Gitpod.io, so you can just go there and prefix any of your GitHub or GitLab URLs with Gitpod.io hash. Alrighty. So let's go back to some of the benefits and core concepts we have here. The first and most important principle is that we automate the developer environments, right? when we write them in code and we version them, this means that we can reproduce them also, right? And it also means that we can go back in time and start a dev environment for whatever my project looked like on that old branch where I have to provide a bug fix. So it's really, almost works on my machine. Like, there is always, systems are complex and there are sometimes strange things happening, but they are happening frequently and regularly, and so therefore it's much more surfaced in this case, and you really it always executes the same recipes. The ephemerality means that you don't onboard on a project and start one workspace, one dev environment, and then you keep maintaining it and drifting apart over time. This is what happens most of the time. If there's automation in projects, then it is this one-off automation. The problem with one-off automation is not only the configuration drift that happens over time, but also because it is executed so rarely, it usually never works when you need it. Only when a new colleague onboards on your project, you execute this. That's just not enough, so it will rot. And then the nice thing is what I just showed you. When you start multiple dev environments, actually for every task, not only for one per project, but one per task, you can work on tasks in parallel. It doesn't mean that you do that kind of cognitively because that's quite hard. But everyone, I think the typical work mode is I work on a long one or two bigger features at the time. I work on two because there are still kind of sometimes times where I wait for feedback from a colleague, for instance, and then I work on the other. And in addition, I do code reviews for others. So there are multiple reasons I would need different dev environments for the same project. And if I just have my local machine, some of us have multiple clones of a Git repo for that matter. But you would still need to do git fetch, check out, run an incremental build, and ideally also run the test in order to make sure you are on a kind of green slate there, or clean slate. The pre-built dev environments, just explaining the difference here is that if you do this ephemeral dev environments, you really want to do that, then you want to be able to throw away a dev environment, right? And you only throw away a dev environment if you haven't invested a lot in that. But if you have to wait 15 minutes for a build, then you have invested a lot because you have invested your time, right? And so therefore, we introduced this notion of pre-builds where we would do everything asynchronously before you even want to start a dev environment. So then you don't have a big investment. I start a dev environment, I use it, and then I can throw it away because I know I can easily recreate one. So that's the whole thing about this. These dev environments are also secure, of course, because or more secure than the current mode where we would have a decentralized, copies of our code base running in networks that we don't control, in coffee shops and so on. But instead, everything is centralized. Your workspaces run in a kind of known environment, in a known network. We can have access audits. All the connections are secured. So this is kind of, think of this as a VDI solution without the problems it has, like the slowness and the degraded developer experience that Citrix and colleagues have. So this is really kind of best of both worlds. You get a great developer experience, but also the security of this kind of isolated machines. The Gitpod dev environments are also contextual. I showed that if you are, for instance, opening a dev environment on a pull request, you it beams you into code review mode. Like it checks out the branch. It has the GitHub extension installed and opened already on that pull request. If you, for instance, start one on an issue, Gitpod would automatically create a local branch for you named after the issue. And the same applies to files, branches, commits, and so on. Whenever you see code on the internet, you prefix it with gitpod io hash. Gitpod will do the right thing and beam you into a lively kind of environment based on that code. With ephemeral dev environments, you also make these dev environments more accessible. Not primarily because you can now code on any device that has a browser, but because you have automated the setup so that also colleagues that are a bit on the side of your projects, like, they don't code every day in that, they can still open a dev environment. Like that is downstream contributors, but also maybe testers, project managers, product managers, and so on. For everyone, it's really easy to start a dev environment, and they all know they have the same setup that the best developers on the team have. And yeah, talking about team, these dev environments are easily work better in collaboration. You can live share your workspaces, but more importantly, also you can snapshot a workspace. Then you get a link and you can share that asynchronously. Finally, the last point I want to get across is, although we are kind of streamlining what a perfect dev environment for a project is, and we need some sort of consensus within the team for that, right? What compiler do we want to use, what database, and so on. But that makes sense, right? You want to have consensus on these points. There are some other points where you don't necessarily need consensus. So those are like special extensions, such as, some people like VI shortcuts, or you want to have a special theme, you like fancy colors or so, but you of course don't want to mandate that or force everyone to use those themes. After all, it's also some sort of kind of personal expression there. And then all kinds of configuration like shortcuts, aliases, and so on. So Gitpod supports this by layering this, as this diagram shows. So you start, when you start a workspace, it's primarily based on the Gitpod YAML, which is kind of a team consensus thing. But then on top, you can have user-specific changes. I also already showed you the .files repository. .files, for those who don't know, it's a repository that gets cloned into your home directory, and then there is a certain way of initializing it, so it applies aliases in your shell, or what the prompt should look like, and things like that. And also user configuration, like my user settings in VS Code or so, they are stored centrally and will be applied on every workspace, but only for me, of course. All right, so with that, I'm at the end of the presentation. If you are interested in this, you can go to gitpod.io and find more information, docs, and so on. There's also the open source repository, github.com, gitpod.io, Gitpod, a community that is lively where you can ask any kind of question, but also just, chat with others. And then, of course, it also is good to follow our Gitpod handle. There's a lot of updates around things we are doing. For instance, next week, there will be a webinar specifically on Java, where 4 different people from the Java community sit together and discuss how ephemeral developer environments make sense in Java projects. All right, so with that, I have a little bit of time left for questions.
So your questions are in your chat. If you look at your chat, I posted questions there.
I see them there, thanks. So there is one question from Didier. Nice too. Do you have any experience with dev environments for older Java EE application server projects? Older, I mean, at least you said JEE, not J2EE, but I don't have experience with that. I don't know what could possibly be the issue there. I know like at least JBoss or so hasn't had any big requirements since the early days. But I don't have experience personally with that. The next question is from Alexander. How do you manage changes to the dev environment in the course of the project? How is this related to the specific code state of a tag or branch? That's a great question. So the Gitpod YAML file sits in your repository. That means it is versioned. So it corresponds to the commit it's sitting in. When you want to, for instance, upgrade your Java version, someone would change that file on a branch, do a pull request, and then everyone has a chance to check on that branch how this change applies to dev environments. It won't affect the main branch. Only if you are happy with that, you can merge it on the main branch, and then starting from that commit, you will use a new Java version. And that, of course, is the same for every kind of change you do. Next question is, what are the local minimum requirements to use Gitpod? Linux, Mac OS? Yeah, so for local, it is the minimum requirement is a modern browser. And in terms of resources, not a lot. Like people use Gitpod on Chromebooks. Seriously, you can also open it on iOS devices, and some work even on iPad Pros. So that works. Yeah, it's really like if you want to use local VS Code or local IntelliJ, you need a bit more, but it's really different to local development because, as I said, the heavy lifting happens on the server side. There's another question. What is the business model of Gitpod? Do you offer additional services or training? So Gitpod is a venture-backed startup. The model is open core. Open core is similar to what GitLab does. It means the core of the software is open source. And then there are some parts that are not open source. In the case of Gitpod, they are source available. So the source you can see and read and so on, but you don't have a license to use them without a license from us. And we usually only flag those features. Like we try to make everything that is good for the developers, like all the core functionality, as open source. And when it comes to, this is a feature for enterprises or businesses, then we use the source available license. And then also we run Gitpod as a SaaS service. So that's another way to run the business. All right. So I have 1 minute left. I guess that's not enough for taking another question. I want to thank you all. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And again, if you have questions, reach out. You see the links. We are happy to help. Bye-bye.